My name is Aisha Spradley, Professional Learning and Instruction Coordinator for Poseidon, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this session. Welcome to the second installment of Poseidon's Faith and STEM Bridging Purpose and Potential series. Today's webinar is entitled Let Your Light Shine, STEM as Ministry. Okay. Anyway, Poseidon is excited to welcome back today's presenter, Dr. Natalie King. Dr. Natalie King is an associate professor of science education at Georgia State University. Through her research programs, initiatives, and grant projects, Dr. King works to promote equity in science teaching and learning, advance the diversification of the STEM teaching workforce, elevate the identities and brilliance of Black girls in STEM, foster the development of community-based, faith-based STEM programs as well. Dr. King is also the founder and executive director of I Am STEM LLC, where she collaborates with community-based organizations to support them as they provide STEM-focused, culturally affirming summer enrichment programs, preparing youth to be critical thinkers and productive citizens. All right, to ground our work today, we have an icebreaker question for everyone. And the question is, how does your faith influence the way you teach or engage the youth you serve? You can unmute yourself or you can answer it in the chat. I see some typing happening, so good stuff is coming. Okay, Ricardo said, try to be more understanding and compassionate is one thing his faith helps him bring as he serves youth. Wonderful. Carol likes to link what they learn about back to God. Perfect. That's perfect. And also what we talked about in the first session. I love that. What about in your style or the kind of environment you like to create? How does your faith help shape that? Sarah said, I'm able to share my faith and pray with my students before every class. That's powerful. Anyone else? I'll give you a second. Okay, Park said, mostly interacting with instructors and program directors in a totally secular setting, but he uses his spiritual gifts to fit them in his role as grant coaching, and he encourages and he teaches. That's perfect. So no matter what your role is, you can bring your faith into it to help. I love that. It's powerful to hear how each of you are bringing your faith and how it shapes how you show up for young people. And I'm sure that Dr. King is going to help you bring that into the work that you do. And I'll hand it over to you now.
Greetings, everyone, and it's a pleasure to see some new faces as well as returning faces from our workshop that we did last week. Thank you so much for the invitation as well. It has been a pleasure to be a part of this community. And so I am going to share my screen. Okay, and so today we are focusing on, again, faith in STEM, building purpose and potential. And my goal is to share, like, how can we let our light shine? I'm going to do so through introducing some of you or just refreshing some of you on maybe some of the practices and standards that help guide us in terms of like STEM education. And then we're going to connect it with social emotional learning and then bring it together with the word. And so I'm hoping that you all would be able to engage again meaningfully. We had a really good time for our previous webinar. And so I'm hoping to keep that same level of engagement. And let's see how we can let our light shine. And so in Matthew 5:16, we're called to let your light so shine before men. And so what we want to be able to talk about today is like get into the heart of STEM programming, but STEM programming as a ministry. In my book, I talk about how you do not need a pulpit in order to minister. And so within our professions and where we show up every single day, we have an opportunity to minister. And I have just figured out how we can begin to leverage the STEM disciplines, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as ways that we can engage students, and not just in the educational aspects of things, but also how they can then connect it with their faith. And so we can use it to uplift, to empower and inspire youth while also addressing social and emotional development and increasing our visibility within communities. And so I'm hoping that you'll be able to figure out if you already have programming, how can we just reassess our programs? Or if you're thinking about creating programs, what does it mean for you to create purpose-driven programs that foster collaborative leadership and cultivate partnerships that amplify impact for our youth and families? And so we've already done the welcome. I'm going to give you an opportunity to engage in just SED lesson. So social emotional learning as well as social emotional development. So I'll talk about social emotional learning and then how we hope to develop it over time. What does it mean for us to have these purpose-driven programs that are embedded in STEM and introducing you to some of the language of STEM, if this is not necessarily what you do on a day-to-day basis, and then how we can then have a clear action plan to increase visibility within the community. All right, so here's our initial question. I want to hear from you. What does it mean to let your light shine? And I don't mean just uh, figuratively, I guess, what it would mean for everyone. I mean, what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you as a person and as an individual, as a vessel, to be light within your community? So this question is personalized. And how is your light currently shining in your community? And so I'll start with me. I would love for a few who would just kind of unmute as well, and we can have conversation. If you feel more comfortable using the chat box, that's fine. Right now, today is our first day of camp, and we've welcomed some children on our campus, as well as some partnering organizations to be able to have 4 to 8 weeks of STEM camp, depending on who the partner is. And so that is a mechanism or vehicle that I have been able to let my light shine within the community. We're also partnering with churches to do STEM-based vacation Bible school. And so even empowering churches and faith-based leaders on how they can connect STEM within their curriculum to offer to children this summer. So that is a tangible way that I am making my light shine within the community. So who would like to volunteer to go next? We can get 2 volunteers.
I'll volunteer.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi. I think when I think about letting my light shine, it has to do with primarily just being as authentic as as I am to those around me, the young girls that we service, their parents. I think it's just important to be honest and authentic. And I think when you do that, um, I don't know, your light just sort of shines.
I love that, and I agree with you 1,000%. Can we get one more to unmute, and then we'll talk about the one in the chat box.
I think for me, I just try to,
Sarah.
hi, I just try to show up, just being there and letting my students and my community know that I'm physically there and present. I try to let my light shine in that way to know that I'm a person that can be counted on.
I love that. That you can show up and then they can count on you. And then Nicole in the chat box says, same, to show up for others, spread laughter, and listen to others in my community. Showing up, listening, being authentic, all of those are ways that we can let our light shine. So what we're going to do is a small activity. And before we'll do the activity, and then I'll refer back to it as I start getting into breaking down what does social emotional development look like, how can we increase our visibility within communities and show up in authentic ways for youth. So this year, my camp theme, we're focusing on Inside Out. How many of you are familiar with the movie? With some of the characters? Okay. And so this one is about sadness. I'm going to show you a quick clip, and hopefully it'll work for me. So give me 1 second. I'll show you a clip, and then we're going to talk about it. While I'm getting the it's about a minute, maybe a minute and 20 seconds. While I'm getting this to show, I'm just going to ask if you can grab a sheet of paper and a pen or pencil, something to write with. Okay, so first day of school, so you can follow along with all the many emotions that are happening, okay, in that play. And I'll make sure to share my sound here.
First day of school, very, very exciting. I was up late last night figuring out a new plan. Here it is, fear. I need a list of all the possible negative outcomes on the first day at a new school.
Way ahead of you there. Does anyone know how to spell meteor?
Disgust. Make sure Riley stands out today, but also blends in.
When I'm through, Riley will look so good, the other kids will look at their own outfits and barf.
Joy. Yes, Joy. You'll be in charge of the console, keeping Riley happy all day long. And may I add, I love your dress. It's adorable. Oh, this old thing? Thank you so much. I love the way it twirls.
Train of thought, right on schedule.
Anger. Unload the daydreams. I ordered extra in case things get slow in class.
Might come in handy if this new school is full of boring, useless classes, which it probably will be.
Oh, sadness. I have a super important job just for you.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Follow me.
What are you doing?
And there. Perfect. This is the circle of sadness. Your job is to make sure that all the sadness stays inside of it.
Okay. So I know that was very quick, but we're going to do an activity with it. Okay. So what I want you to do is on your sheet of paper, you're going to draw a circle, and not like a little tiny circle. You can draw it large enough to kind of fit in the paper. And Joy was the one that you were seeing kind of running around in the clip. And so she assigns tasks to every emotion except sadness. And Joy tells sadness to stay inside. And she draws this circle and not to do anything, right? And so for some of us, like, we try to lock our own sadness, just like Joy tried to do with sadness. But what if sadness had been allowed to help Riley? And so what we want to do is I want to give you a moment just to reminisce and to think about one moment, just one moment when you were sad or experienced sadness. And it could have been today, it could be over the weekend, it could have been 10 years ago, right? So just sit and just think of a moment that comes to your mind about when you were sad. I want you to put that on the inside of the circle. And then on the outside of the circle, I want you to then start writing ways that you were able to overcome it. And so how did you get through that moment of sadness? It could be people, it could be things that you did. And I want you to write that on the outside. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. And while you're doing that, I'm going to play a song softly. And then by the time that song is done, we'll be ready to share. And I'll ask for 2 or 3 volunteers.
You're the engine that makes all things go. And you're always in disguise, my hero. I see your light in the dark. Smile in my face when we all know it's hard. There's no way to ever pay you back. Bless your heart, no, I love you for that. Honest and selfless. I don't know if this helps it, but good job. You're doing a good job, a good job. You're doing a good job, don't get too down. The world needs you now. Know that you matter, 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 yeah. You're doing a good job, a good job. You're doing a good job, don't get too down. The world needs you now. Know that you matter, 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 yeah. 6 in the morning. As soon as you walk through that door, everyone needs you again. The world's out of order. It's not a sound when you're not around. all day on your feet, hard to keep that energy. I know when it feels like the end of the road, you don't let go. You just press forward. You're the engine that makes all things go. Always in disguise, my hero. I see a light in the dark. Smile in my face, but we all know it's hard. There's no way to ever pay you back. Bless your heart, know I love you for that. Honest and selfless. I don't know if this helps it, but good job. Doing a good job, good job, good job. Doing a good job, don't get too down. The world needs you now. Know that you matter, matter, matter. Yeah, it's a good job. Doing a good job, good job, good job. Doing a good job, don't get too down. World needs you now. Know that you matter, matter, matter. Yeah, the fathers, the teachers that reach us, strangers, the friends that show up in the end. From the bottom to the top, the listeners that hear us. This is for you. You make me feel that. Did a good job, good job. Do a good job, don't get too down. World needs you now. Know that you matter, matter, matter. Yeah.
Okay. Who would like to share?
Hi, this is Isis Chapman. I would like to share.
Hi, Isis. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. This is phenomenal. So what my circle on the inside, I put on the inside my niece transitioning to be with the Lord. That was inside of the circle. And the items that I put on the outside of the circle include connecting to her boyfriend, connecting to her little sister, and trying to help them through specific processes. At that point I heard from God and he gave me specific assignments with those two people. So what I identified was that I'm best dealing with death and mourning when I have an assignment specifically from God. That's it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do we have another volunteer?
I can go. My name is Ricardo Hernandez. I'm the program director of the Gettysburg College 21st Century After School program. And I was just thinking about like just the past couple of months before I got this job. I didn't have a job for like 6 months. My car had broken down. It was just like a mess, right? I was like struggling. And it was really like a really bad point for me. But in that time, I also realized that I value alone time. I live in a house of five, so you know, finding alone time can be difficult. And I'm resilient. I'm blessed, and I'm enough. That I'm not defined by a lack of a job, lack of money, lack of whatever. That I have enough, and that I have a hard time. Also, a hard truth was comparing myself to others, comparing myself to what I want. I'm a very ambitious guy, but sometimes that takes away from my joy from being grateful. And also, I noticed that just yeah, I'm an emotional guy, but I prefer to just like go out for a run, you know, go out in the garden. And those are times where I kind of release that negativity or that sadness in a positive way.
That is very powerful. And I also was noticing that you were using affirmations for yourself as well as you were getting through it. Do we have one more that would like to share? Okay, so thank you all for participating. Something that we like to tell our scholars too is that it's okay to experience anger. It's okay to experience fear and embarrassment. You know, sometimes we're like, you want to be joyful all the time, but sometimes, you know, sometimes you're not feeling it, and that's okay as well. And so for us, it's helping as we're going through things and we're learning a different strategies, that we're also teaching our children and our youth different strategies as well. Because it's okay to feel all these emotions. What do you do when you're experiencing them? And what are some positive and healthy ways that you are able to kind of get through them? And so a verse that we put with this is that there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time for everything under the sun. And there's going to be some times where you're hurting. You're going to go through some tough patches in life, some things that you'll be prepared for, and some things that will just catch you off guard and you will have to, deal with. And so what are some healthy ways to deal with these different emotions? And Inside Out too, they also have anxiety. And so anxiety, my goodness, is about to take over. And a lot of us, and a lot of our children experience stress and anxiety in different ways. And some of the unhealthy habits that are developed as adults and even as youth are because we don't necessarily know or have the tools, the words, the resources, the wherewithals, the strategies in order to deal with them in more in positive ways. And so thank you all for sharing. Thank you for sharing your own stories. And I think that it will also help as we start delving into more into social and emotional development. So I'm going to show just one more quick video, and then we'll stick to the slides after that. So give me 1 second. Let me transition one more time. And we talk about social emotional learning, and I'm going to discuss each of the competencies with you. And then I'm going to make a connection to STEM, and then I'm going to make a connection to our scriptures. But I think just hearing about the framework itself is going to be helpful, and then we can move on. 1 second.
Think about the young people in your lives and all the different places where they're learning about themselves, how to relate to others, and work together on goals. How can we intentionally create learning experiences that will help all young people develop and maintain positive relationships, become lifelong learners, and contribute to a more caring, just world? Educators, researchers, community members, families, and the students themselves agree what we need is social and emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that help us to understand ourselves, connect with others, achieve our goals, and support our communities. We all need opportunities to learn and engage in environments where we feel safe, valued, and a sense of belonging. So how does SEL help schools, families, and communities work together so that all young people have these kinds of learning experiences and achieve success in education, careers, and life? CASEL's framework identifies 5 areas of competence that together help us develop a healthy sense of who we are, manage stress, understand the views of others, and work together to create schools and communities where everyone can grow their strengths and interests. Self-awareness is about how we think about ourselves and who we are. It includes understanding our culture, our thoughts, feelings, and what we believe we're capable of, and understanding how these things can influence our behaviors and beliefs. Self-management is the ability to manage those emotions, thoughts, and actions in different situations so that we can achieve individual and collective goals. This includes coping with stress and anxiety, persevering through challenges, and taking action to create positive change. Social awareness is how we understand others, how we learn to take different perspectives and empathize even with people who are different from us. It also includes understanding how the broader norms and systems around us influence how we develop and create a sense of belonging. Relationship skills are how we connect and engage effectively with others, and how we form lasting friendships and connections. This includes communicating clearly, solving problems together, managing conflict and disagreements, and standing up for ourselves and the rights of others. Lastly, responsible decision-making is how we put it all together to make caring and constructive choices. this includes thinking critically about consequences, analyzing the impact of our actions on ourselves and others, and identifying solutions that support our collective well-being. We continue to develop and practice SEL throughout our lives and can adapt and apply these competencies across different contexts and cultures. How we develop SEL is impacted by our environments, which is why we need to work together across classrooms, schools, families, and communities. In the classroom, students can be explicitly taught SEL skills and also can practice and apply SEL during core subjects, like discussing different perspectives in social studies and language arts, or collaboratively problem solving in science or math. SEL is most effective when supported by evidence-based programs and trusting relationships where students are treated as partners in their learning. Beyond the classroom, SEL can be intentionally promoted throughout the school experience, from the way they're greeted in the morning to how discipline practices are carried out and how adults themselves develop and model positive relationships and the SEL competencies. Outside of school, families and caregivers provide the earliest and ongoing learning and interactions for their children, so it's important that schools listen to and authentically partner with families to help shape SEL priorities and strategies for supporting their children. Similarly, when schools partner with community organizations to align their efforts, SEL opportunities can be strengthened and students benefit even more. With SEL, we can help create schools and learning spaces where all young people feel connected, inspired, engaged, and ready to contribute to the world around them.
All right, so I thought that they would do a better job of just explaining social emotional learning. And so I wanted to think through in terms of like, what does this actually look like for us? And CASO stands for the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And so here are the 5 main competencies that we would do within our classrooms, our schools, as families and caregivers, as well as like the larger communities. What does it look like through authentic partnerships and programming? So another framework that kind of guides some of the work that we do from a STEM education side, we have something called 3-dimensional teaching and learning. And the 3 dimensions are looking at the disciplinary core ideas. So that are kind of what you kind of think about when you think of science, like the biological sciences, the physical sciences. You think of like engineering and technology. And so those are like what we would think of like the content, right? And so a lot of times, and probably it's changed within the past about 10 years, but typically the standards were based on like the content of what we want to be taught. And so the students will learn about the water cycle. They will learn about the structure and function of the heart, for example. But then within next generation science standards and within the past, I would call it about 10 to 13 years, it's kind of been adapted in different ways. But we started thinking more broadly in terms of not just what do we want you to learn, but how do you do it? Like, how is science done? How is engineering done? And so we have these science and engineering practices. And so let me go back. The 3 dimensions are the disciplinary core ideas. They're the science and engineering practices, as well as cross-cutting concepts. Cross-cutting concepts goes across the sciences. And so students should be able to recognize patterns. They should be able to recognize cause and effect relationships and systems. But when you start thinking about the science and engineering practices, this is like the doing. What are students actually doing if they're engaged in science and engineering? One of them, if they're in science, they're going to be asking questions. If they're doing engineering, they're going to be defining as well as solving problems. And so if you give them a question, they should be able to go into a scientific investigation. If you give them a problem, they should be able to go through the engineering design process in order to come up with some solutions. We also develop and use models. They should be able to plan and carry out investigations. They should be able to analyze and interpret data. and use mathematics and computational thinking. We also want them to be able to construct their own explanations and design solutions. They should be able to engage in argument from evidence, as well as obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. These are skills. These are the practices of scientists and engineers. And so as you're thinking about the content, you should equally give thought to the how. What does this actually look like? And so am I posing a question to them that they now have to go into an investigation? Am I giving them a problem and now they will just do like problem-based learning or the engineering design process? Am I giving them access to data and now I want them to be able to analyze and interpret the data and then come up with an argument from the evidence that they have in front of them? And so you have to start thinking about what are some of these practices that we want to be able to see our students to develop. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect social emotional learning with science and engineering practices and give you some examples of what this looks like. So the first one was self-awareness. And so if we start thinking about what does it mean for our scholars to be self-aware, how they think about themselves and who they are, I can give a connection of like encouraging students to reflect on what they're curious about, how their interests or values shape the questions that they ask, as well as helping students to become aware of their learning styles, what data means to them emotionally and cognitively. And so we can then that's connected them asking questions, defining problems, as well as analyzing and interpreting data. An example activity could be having students design a simple investigation around a question that they're personally curious about. For example, why do plants grow better in one place than another? This is could be something that they even do and take on as like what should be like science fair projects. Science fair projects are usually things that are interesting to them or that they have some curiosity about and they wanted to explore more, and then they just have to go through like this scientific process to kind of get answer a question. I don't know if that's how it's always done in schools, but for them to become a little bit more self-aware. They could also journal their emotional responses during the process, connecting the two. If you start thinking about self-management and managing their thoughts and actions in different situations, a connection could be like promoting persistence, focus, and managing frustration when experiments don't go as expected. And a lot of times when we're in lab, experiments don't go as we think they should. I remember when I was in chemistry lab in college, and I accidentally spilled sulfuric acid. And it was like through my jeans. And I was like, oh my goodness. I literally, in that moment, I went and I changed and then I dropped the course. What I didn't think I was going to pass after that moment, but I was so stressed out. And so how do you manage like frustration even when things don't go as planned or expected? And then it requires time management and thoughtful decision-making in investigations. And so they're using critical thinking even as they're going through the scientific process. And so this can be that they're planning and carrying out investigations, or even when they're using math and computational thinking as they're getting toward some possible solutions. An example activity can be using an engineering design challenge, such as like building a bridge or water filter. And a lot of times when you're going through like the engineering design process, you come up with something that you're able to test. And when you test, there's always ways that you can improve the solution, or always ways that you can improve the model. And so if they build the bridge and something, a part of it collapses, or that they see another way, or they see someone else present and they're seeing a different structure that works better, then they're always thinking about like, how can I also make this better? Thoughtful decision-making throughout the process. And they're able to set goals. They can monitor their progress as well as reflect on how they've managed their challenges. If we're thinking about like social awareness, and how they're understanding others. Again, we can have several alignments across our science and engineering practices, but some connections could be like we're teaching respectful discourse, considering multiple perspectives in scientific discussions. There's not always one right way and one right answer. And so how do different people get to these possible solutions? And then emphasizing designing solutions that benefit others. And so what I love to hear from scholars and how we've been able to get more youth engaged in STEM is that they're not doing STEM for the sake of just being engaged in STEM or an activity. They're doing it because now they have a mission behind the work that they're doing. And so when I was partnering with a school and we were starting their organic garden beds, we got a lot more participation when they were able to see that it was helping to feed their community that was in a food desert. They were able also to sell things like the quail eggs and herbs, some of the flowers and other things that they were able to grow within their garden, some of the vegetables and peppers, garlic, and they were able to then refurbish and to sustain their garden, but they were able to also serve the community. So when they see that there's a larger purpose behind what it is that they're doing, then that usually helps to get the more of the buy-in, because a lot of times when people say that they want to be a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer or a nurse, it's because they want to help people. Well, you can use the STEM disciplines to help people, and we would just have to be a little bit more creative in terms of what that looks like. So they can introduce a community-based problem like poor air quality, have students work in teams to design solutions that consider different groups affected by the issue. For another program that we helped to support, they were in a school and it was old. And so there were a lot of things that were going wrong, but a lot of kids were getting sick and having their asthma triggered just by being in the building. And so as they were thinking about how a new building that they would design, the students were able to come up with their own proposals of what are some of the types of things that they wanted in their buildings. And they put together this proposal and presented it back to the school board. And so there are ways that you can use like the engineering design process, or that they can connect to science, but it's them figuring out what is the larger why, or how is it bigger than me? And that social awareness of how they're able to now understand and connect with others, that is not just about me. In terms of relationship skills, you can look at some of the aligned SEPs, science and engineering practices, but some connections could be just strengthening communication, active listening, respectful disagreement in group investigations. We all might not come up with the same path of what we want to be able to do, but we're able to listen and we're able to communicate. We might try one, and then if it doesn't work, we can try the other. But we also encourage equitable roles and shared leadership in STEM groups. A way that we like to come up with things is like we have different roles and we list the responsibility so that everyone feels like they have a part to play and can select a role that maybe they are good at in terms of like being able to do more of observations. I was just doing on Saturday, working with a few churches in Oklahoma, and we were talking about like basically how the heart and the lungs not just function individually, but also collectively, and how they work together, especially during exercise. So we talked about how they were able to take their pulse. How do you count that in beats per minute? If you're going to use the radial by your wrist, or carotid by your neck. And then from there, we were going to do an obstacle course. And so with the obstacle course, you had some folks who were like, okay, I'll be the runners. And they were, doing the hopscotch and the jumping rope and the hula hoops and everything else to kind of get to the other side. But then you had some who was like, okay, well, I have some physical restrictions. And so what I'll do is I'll stay at the end, and then I'll be able to take the notes on, what they did. They had to take observations, so they should be able to see that they were physically breathing harder. They started to perspire. When they took their pulse, they were able to see that it was increased from their resting pulse. So we were able to teach about like the exercise and how the body kind of functions, the different systems function, but we did it through an obstacle course. And so just thinking about like, what are some of these different roles that you can kind of name even as you create activities so that everyone can find their space and they can still participate and feel like they're contributing meaningfully. You can also use peer feedback loop during an investigation, poster presentations where students give constructive feedback, and they can also practice affirming each other's contributions. And the last one we'll talk about is responsible decision making. And so you can see the aligned SEPs, but some connections are that we can promote critical thinking about the impacts of scientific decisions, environmental, ethical. I mean, environmental, we are talking about global warming, climate change these days, deforestation and erosion. Ethical, we're thinking about even the ethics of artificial intelligence. That's coming up in all kind of conversations, especially with teachers, and they're saying that students are cheating. Well, I mean, a lot of them have access to AI. And so what does it mean for them to use it in a ethically responsible way? And then we can encourage youth to weigh evidence before acting and consider long-term outcomes. So they can explore moral STEM dilemma, such as genetic engineering, AI. They can facilitate values-based discussions, grounded in evidence, as well as biblical principles, talking about stewardship, talking about integrity, justice, and even compassion. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but I wanted to figure out, like, how do we take these things that typically kind of operate in isolation, but then how can we begin to then merge them for more comprehensive, toward more comprehensive programming and lessoning. So now what I want to do is I want to add the Bible and faith and how we can then have specific, like, biblical examples of what this could look like. So I'm going to take it a step further. Okay, so if you're looking at self-awareness, and we talked about what these things are, so you can recognize your own strengths and areas for growth, they can identify what they know, where they need to help, such as in the engineering design process. But then a Bible story could be around maybe like David and Goliath. Because David was pretty self-aware. He knew his strengths, and he knew that, look, I can't have all this armor on me. That's not where I operate best. But because I was a shepherd, I know how to use this slingshot, right? And so he was able to, like, operate within his zone of genius, is what we call it, right? And so even he might have had some limitations, but he knew, he was very self-aware, and he was able to act in confidence because he had faith in God. He knew who he served, but he also knew his skill sets from just caring for the sheep and looking after the sheep these many years, right? And so we can start thinking about that and then connecting it to some of these characters, connecting some of these, similarly how we did with Inside Out. We can do that the same way with Bible characters. So he's able to act in confidence in both his identity and in God. And so self-awareness is not just about knowing who you are, but knowing whose you are. And so that can be like a take-home message in terms of how we're connecting SED, how we're connecting STEM, how we're connecting Bible stories, and also having that message that students will be able to kind of take home with them. If we're starting to think about self-management, a lot of things that we're talking about and dealing with today, especially with our youth, is around stress and anxiety. Our babies are stressed. And I've saw a peak in this even like after COVID. And it has not really gone away. They could be stressed about grades, stressed about fitting in school and belonging, not getting things turned in on time, stressed about like dynamics that might be happening in their household that they may not feel comfortable talking about. And so if we manage stress or persevering through challenges, then they'll be able to think through, what does it mean to persist through failed experiences? What does it mean to experiments? What does it mean to manage your time and projects, regulate their frustrations, which we talked about. But then we can also think about Nehemiah and him rebuilding this wall. So he was able to show self-management and staying focused. I'm not coming down off this wall to deal with this because I have to focus on this task that is at hand right now. He was able to manage opposition. He was able to complete the task despite obstacles. And so again, there's ways that we can start naming these social emotional competencies, and then connecting it back with folks who they're able to learn about in the Bible. And we can also find fun ways to connect it through STEM. And so the take-home message would be that God calls us to steward our emotions and gifts with discipline as well as with grace. All right, so if we're thinking about social awareness and respect for others, we can also think about the Good Samaritan. We talk about this story all the time. It's one of the more regularly use stories in children's church and everything else that you might offer. But this is a model of social awareness as well as compassion across social boundaries. And so looking and saying, okay, you know, how can we also be a good Samaritan? How can we make sure that we're not just thinking about ourselves, but we're looking for others who might be in need? And we can share that Jesus modeled empathy by seeing and serving those that society overlooked. And so again, making these rich connections across. If we're thinking about these relationship skills, these are active listening, teamwork, resolving disagreements. Collaboration is key, and collaboration is one of our 21st century skills. So they need to be able to collaborate while they're working on STEM projects, working in teams, going through engineering challenges. And so we can think about Paul and Barnabas mentoring others and how they demonstrated partnership and mentorship, and also how to handle disagreement with respect. And so there are rich ways that we can begin to make these connections. And then we know that iron sharpens iron. Thinking about our friendships, our relationships, they refine our faith and they refine our work. And then the last one is around responsible decision making. So we can consider consequences as well as well-being of self and others. And these are these ethical dilemmas in science that we talked about, such as sustainability, such as artificial intelligence, and designing for equity. So we can think about Daniel in Babylon, and he made responsible decisions under pressure with integrity and with faith. And so our take-home message would be that wise decision making is rooted in faith, it's rooted in discernment as well as the word. And so I know that I kind of talked through a lot, but I wanted to introduce each one separately in terms of social emotional learning. What does it mean for us? Like, what are some of the guiding principles in terms of three-dimensional teaching and learning, and how we're thinking about what science and engineering should look like from a teaching and learning perspective? How we're then connecting to the Bible and connecting to our faith, and how we bring these things together to offer more comprehensive programming to youth. All right, so here just a little table, just looking at the 5 competencies, some examples of things that we can do within the STEM learning space that will get at either some of those practices that we want to be able to develop, some examples of Bible stories. There are many, just gave one for each one, as well as like, here are some of the take-home faith messages that you can, when you're starting to connect those, that are rich and help students and our youth as they're continuing to develop. And so while we're saying social emotional learning, over time it's developing. And so we call them social emotional development. All right, so what I want you to do, I know I've kind of shared a lot of examples with you, but I want you to think about your own example, or maybe just a way that you can then begin to make some of these connections. And what I can do is I'll put it back on the last slide, and that will give you just some initial thoughts, and we'll see maybe if one person might be willing to share. You can come up with your own example. So choose any of the competencies, and then maybe a Bible story that you might connect with it, or a faith message. You can think of all 3, but even if you come up with, you know, the competency and just a Bible story, or the competency and a STEM example, that's fine too. Whatever you're comfortable with. So I'll give about 60 seconds and I'll see if 1 or 2 would like to share. All right, do we have anyone who would like to share?
I think I'll share, but I'm not sure if I'm accurate on this.
That's okay, let's hear it.
But the problem or the issue would be building the relationship skills amongst girls.
Okay.
Where they could begin to trust that they can stand on their faith. And if the goal is to, I should have said this, it was to not raise, but to grow virtuous young ladies.
Okay.
I guess that's the word I'm looking for. So
Do you
would
have a Bible story? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Tracy.
would the competency be the responsible decision making or the relationship skill?
Depends on, so I initially, based on what you shared, was thinking that you're talking about relationship skills.
I was.
Okay. And so do you have a STEM example or a Bible story that you were thinking about?
The Bible story that immediately comes to mind is Ruth.
Oh, and Naomi.
Ruth and Naomi, exactly.
Okay. All right. So, Ruth said
Ruth
that
Ruth told Naomi where she goes,
I'm gonna go.
that she's going to go with her, and where she lies, she's going to lie with her. And
Your people will be my people, your God, my God. And so
exactly.
she was able to cling to Naomi, and Naomi was going through a pretty tough time because she had lost her husband, she had lost her two sons, and Ruth became to her better than the two sons, right? She became closer to her, and then we see how the story ends with Boaz, and then their genealogy ended up becoming Jesus was in their line of genealogy with Obed. And so if you're starting to think about relationship building, an example of something that you can do is something that I just got through doing before coming up to do this webinar was that we have a group of girls who are here, and I had them to, on a sticky note, they had to write, so I have sticky notes in my hand as well. They had to write two like non-negotiables if they're going to be able to operate in this space and be able to thrive for the next month. And so for one, it could be that, I want to be respected at all times. Some talked about this, like the tone and level of not just the voice level, but also the tone in which to being spoken to, wanting to engage meaningfully and wanting people to be kind and open-minded. So they wrote these things down. They were able to then organize them, and then we use that to come up with what their group norms would be. And so it's ways that you can do, it's not necessarily a STEM example, but it's an activity, a type of activity that you can then develop community, because now I'm not the one coming up and telling them rule number one, rule number two, raise your hand if you should speak, right? They are coming up with these norms, and then they can remind themselves of those things if we ever get off track. Look, go back to number 4. We discussed this on day 1. Each of us contributed to developing these, and so we can now hold each other accountable. And so those are kind of like tangible ways that you can then develop relationships, rich relationships as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, because I know that we're at time, I don't have anything else other than I'm going to send Aisha a document, but what it is for you all is a 30-day challenge. And so what I've done is put together some examples of what you can do in the next 30 days to let your light shine and to bring all these things together. Okay, so I'll quickly just go through what some of them look like. And it's like split up into 4 weeks. You can decide when you want to do things, but check off as many as possible off of this list over the next 30 days. All right. And so the first one is that casting the vision. So I want you to start thinking about, like, how do you pray for clarity on how your church or your organization can serve through STEM? Read Matthew 5 and 16 and journal about your light and what that might look like and how you are positioned to be able to bring STEM to children. It could be through children's church. It could be through a teacher at a school or whatever that you do. How are you positioned and how will you seek a way to do this? You can identify 1 to 2 youth who would benefit from STEM support. Research the local STEM summer programs and see how you might be able to contribute if you don't have one of your own. You might be able to host maybe a 30-minute interest meeting with ministry leaders or figure out how you can get other people to be able to join you in this vision. Maybe create a STEM ministry or vision board. It could be physical or digital of what this might be able to look like to really engage students in STEM. and then share your vision board on social media or with your pastor or with your local church or however you're structured, because, you know, people are representing organizations and schools and churches, whatever that might look like for you. So week 1 might just be casting the vision. All right. Week 2 is going to be build and bless. So laying the foundation. So if you have access to youth and parents, maybe ask them about what some of their STEM interests are. You can meet with a STEM educator in your church and or community. They can bring them in as like a guest speaker of sorts. You might be able to identify a room or area where you can host a STEM session. For me, I did actually taught a lesson about, we had an I Am series and I had I Am Light. And so we end up doing simple circuits. And so they wrote down their favorite scripture about light, and they were able to light their card up. And they were able to take that home. And so just think about something small that you might be able to do. Maybe collect supplies for a STEM starter kit that you might be able to have to do some activities. Attend a STEM focused webinar or YouTube lesson, and you all can check that off today. You can create a flyer or a Canva post to recruit volunteers, or even invite a young person to co-lead or offer some ideas. And so on our advisory board, we do have youth that serve on our advisory board. And so we're always engaging and not getting too far away from the youth. So we're always having their fresh ideas. Okay, so then week 3 is about faith in action and serving through STEM. And so you can lead a STEM plus Bible devotional, like creation or design or anything. So think about just one small activity that you can then connect the two. Host a STEM story time with a Bible themed book. Maybe set up a mini STEM station after Sunday service, or create STEM care kits for youth. Organize a STEM Saturday, or pilot with 2 or 3 kids, or if you're already teaching activities or teaching kids, you might be able to infuse it that way. And maybe share some photos and reflections from your pilot. And you could do that through like a social media post, or even if you're like, you don't want to share it on social media, you can send it to me via email. I'll be happy to see that and to respond. And ask the youth to share what they learned during church service. And then the last week is around shining bright and making it sustainable. So reflect on your biggest win and your biggest lesson. You might be able to meet with some of your leadership to propose maybe like a quarterly type of program. Maybe there's like mini grants or local sponsorships that you can apply for that can help to build capacity to sustain your programs. Maybe there might be a possibility to partner with a local school or library or another community-based organization. Create a STEM in the Bible activity or a guide. You might be able to get parents involved just so that they know what's happening, or just share via a newsletter what you've done. Or you feel free to like record a short video or reel and just share the journey or share what the students are doing to get others excited about the work, even if it's shared just internally with your church. And then the last 2 days that are there is maybe to host a Let Your Light Shine celebration showcase. You can invite families, youth, and congregation to see the STEM activities or any testimonies, and have a recap or testimonial to your network. That way you can kind of, again, build capacity and spread the word. I know that's a lot, but hey, even if you just do 2 or 3 of them, like in 30 days, it gives you just some ideas of what this might look like, and then breaks it down into different phases. And so with that, we don't have time to do our commitment chat, but if you can think of one way that you'll let your light shine this month through STEM, I gave you 30, maybe think of at least one that you'll start off with. And thank you so much for the invitation again. I appreciate you.
Right, thank you. That concludes our session for today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'd like to thank Dr. King for taking the time to share this information with us. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation survey that's been put in the chat box. And this concludes Let Your Light Shine, STEM is Ministry.